Alright, we're gonna open with another speculative hand. As you can see, only 2 times the big blind. One of the byproducts of opening only 2 times the big blind rather than 2.5 or 3 is you get to open more frequently, and it costs you the same amount of chips. If you were opening 3 times the big blind, if you open 4 pots at 3 times the big blind, that's 12 big blinds that you're spending. If you're only opening 2 times the big blind, you can open 6 pots, and it's the same 12 big blinds. But what you've done is you've got yourself involved in 2 additional pots. And if you're a good post-flop player, you can maneuver yourself to winning those 2 additional pots, or give yourself 2 additional pots to make a big hand and hopefully win a big pot with. So that's why I like to. It's one of the big reasons why I like to make a very small, most often minimum raise. It's because it lets me spend the same amount but raise more pots than if I was raising 3 times the big blind or 4 times the big blind. So that's just a little side lesson there. As it stands, we get a caller from the small blind and surprisingly a fold from the big blind. And this is what's called playing out of flow. I'm the pre-flop raiser. Normally he would check. I would bet with anything, including 5 high, and then if he had a, say he had a 10 or even better a 7, that's when he would put a raise in, and he would get, he would pick up. If I folded, he would pick up the bluff that I made on the flop. When he makes this bet, he's not giving me a chance to bluff, and I would have bluffed here. I would have bet anything I had. If I flop, 4 sevens, I probably would have bet. As it stands, I have 5 high, and I would have bet even then. By leading out like this, by playing out of flow, as they say, he's giving the pre-flop aggressor no chance to bluff post-flop. And if I would have bet out 250, he could have raised there, and he would have won my 250. As it stands, he's not winning anything from me because I'm just going to fold my 5 high. Alright, addicted limps, and I isolate. Now the situation is backwards in that I'm the one to lead out on the flop because he's in position. But this is the exact same bet that I would have made, on the previous hand with the 5-4 suited. And as you can see, now that he makes his raise, he won that extra bet from me. He didn't give me a chance to make this bet in the hand prior, which I would have made. But he does take advantage of me now by making a little raise on the flop here and winning that extra bet. Alright, so now that we have a nice sample on Coppercliff, we've played 117 hands with him, we have a good, we can take a look at his stats. He's playing 41% of the pots, which is a lot, and he's raising 16% of the pots, which is fairly aggressive. As you can see, only 24J is raising more pots pre-flop in this tournament than Coppercliff. Now, sometimes in this spot, when we're both fairly deep stack, I would call here. Against a tighter player, I probably would just call and hope to hit my ace or king. But against a player who's opening a lot of pots, I like a 3-bet here, which is what I do. Usually that's, I like to make my 3 bets more than 2x, but not too much more, and not as high as 2.5, so this is, kind of in that ballpark. We actually don't mind that he calls. He's not showing. If he had 4-bet, I think I might have folded my ace-king because I don't want to get into too big a situation with ace-high versus the other big stack of the table. The fact that he just called and we're in position is a great situation for us. We get a fairly nondescript flop. Most likely this doesn't hit any hand that he's calling our 3-bet with, so we can take a little stab and fold, and we win ourselves a nice spot. I wouldn't mind a raise here to isolate Coppercliff, but I also wouldn't mind limping along, which is what I do. Actually, I wouldn't mind a fold either. Alright, so here's that weak lead, and I think we're going to raise here. We do. And he folds, and we win that pot. If these two guys hadn't come along from... Well, actually, they had to come along because there was a limp. But if these two guys weren't in the hand, I think I would have made this raise with any two cards. Or I'd like to see me make that raise with any two cards, given the pattern we've noticed out of Coppercliff. So we're going to open Ace-Queen for 2x. And given the players in the big blind, in the blinds, it's not surprising that both of them call. Here's the weak lead by Coppercliff. Again, this is a player playing out of flow. I was the pre-flop raiser. I'm supposed to be the one who's betting on the flop. But instead, just the big blind decides to lead out. And I make a nice raise with 2 overcards and the nut flush draw. And he folds. So there's more evidence that he makes a lot of... When he's making that weak lead on the flop, it is in fact weak, because most of the time, or actually every single time we've raised it so far, he's folded. So I would like to see us do that a lot more. And in the future, I think we're going to get a lot of situations where we do have the opportunity to do that, but we don't take advantage of it as often as I think we should. Given the fact that we actually had a big hand here, making the raise is pretty standard. But if the ace I had was the ace of spades, I think even then making that raise without the flush draw would have been a profitable play. Okay, so Eradicator raises. He has a lot of chips now. I don't mind calling here, but I would like to see him. I would like to see a 3-bet from me. I think that's what I do. No, I call. Yeah, I think if I had 3-bet, that probably would have been a better play. As it stands, I can't do anything with it now. Actually, this dynamic of him raising me from the small blind and me having a weak ace in the big blind, and me playing weakly on the flop here, comes into play relatively soon in one of the more fun hands that I play in the tournaments. Alright, so Eradicator raises, and here for sure I have to 3-bet him, and I do. Same sizing as I use against Coppercliff. Calls. He checks. Now normally I would, as I said before, lead out for something in the neighborhood of 41-42% of the pot. I think when I have a medium pair, and I would consider 10s and 9s and even jacks somewhat of a medium pair, and there are no overcards, I like to shut it down right now. I think I'm going to bet a bit more than my usual just to get Eradicator out of the way right now before he hits an overcard. So we bet 10-10, and he folds. Okay, so the flop play here was pretty standard. Pre-flop caller checked to the raiser, he bet, and the pre-flop caller called. And so we get to the turn, which is where things get fairly interesting. Again, the caller, big stack 24J, checks, and Stu RS continues to be aggressive. Big stack calls. Okay, I think that's fairly standard from all accounts for Stu. Like the flop bet for sure, and it's, firing the second barrel on the turn is it's tough to do when you have a top pair and a 6 kicker, but I like the fact that he followed through on it. And the river bet when he actually makes 2 pairs, fairly standard. As for big stack, I don't mind the flop call. You know, Stu RS raised pre-flop and now it's been the flop. He does not have to have a king. When he fires again on the turn, I think this is where big stack should consider shutting down, because he does have the pair. He does have top pair, but he has obviously the worst kicker. And I think the river call is a bit too optimistic for big stack. It's not too often that someone's 3-barreling you, and I think big stack is just trying to be a hero here and pick off a 3-barrel bluff against a player he may not know that well. The numbers we have on Stu are fairly aggressive, and maybe big stack knows Stu more than we do. But calling 3 barrels with top pair, no kicker, and he dusted off pretty much all his formerly large stack. He went into this hand with 5k, and he pretty much gave away 3,200 of it, calling down with top pair, low kicker, which that's a huge leak for a player who was playing fairly well up until that point. Alright, it's folded to us on the button, and we have a big ace, and let's see. So now, I think one thing to mention here, which changes the dynamic of the hand, not so much in this situation, but in general, is that Lina 55, who's blinded down to 8 big blinds, I think she was sitting out for the entire tournament up until this point, and past this point actually. So we can pretty much disregard her here and only play against Stu. Ace 10 offsuit on the button is certainly good enough to raise here, and that's an oversized 3-bet. If you remember, when these two guys opened and I 3-bet, they opened to 360 and I made it 810. I'm opening to 300 and he's making it 1350. Essentially what he's doing is making all the hands I have that are worse than him fold, and any hand that I have that is better than him come over the top. And so he's committing way too many chips. I wouldn't mind him betting 900, but I don't think anything more than that is going to do the job that he wants done. What he's doing with the actual hand I have is making it very easy for me to fold. I certainly would have come along with something like Ace Queen, Ace King, Jacks, 10s, possibly 9s, but anything weaker than that I can safely fold. Alright, again I'm going to open with a speculative hand, suited 1-gapper. I think this is a pretty good board to bet into. 9-4-3 Rainbow doesn't hit a lot of their hands, and since they didn't re-raise pre-flop, it's tough for them to represent an overpair. So I lead out small, again, for about 40% of the pot. And I'm going to fold to this action. Then I'm definitely going to fold to that action. I don't mind the flat pre-flop with Ace-9 offsuit versus me. I think Addicted knows that I'm an aggressive player, so I could have a lot of hands that are worse than Ace-9 offsuit. This flat with 9-8 offsuit from Big Stack, when he only has 16 big blinds, is pretty bad. He's just gambling at this point. And when you find yourself just gambling, essentially you've given up. I think I would have actually liked it if I'd raised and there was a flat here. This is actually a perfect stack size to shove. Squeeze, it's called the squeeze play, because once he gets past me, Addicted can't really call with any hands he has. He didn't have a hand good enough to re-raise me, so he can't possibly have a hand good enough to call this shove. So Big Stack can squeeze him in the middle of us two, and once I fold, he knows that the Addicted can safely fold. As it stands, as they played it on the flop, once I bet and Addicted raises, this is never good. And like I said, he's never getting a fold once this guy raises. based on his stack size. So he's pretty much given up the way he played this hand. He's just gambling and hoping to suck out on somebody, and is no longer playing the thinking poker that he was playing earlier in the tournament. We don't mind that a tough, aggressive player has busted out. Alright, Eradicator raises. I think I'm going to 3-bet him here. I do. As you can tell, as you can see, before when he made it 360, I made it 810. Now that he's making it a bit smaller, I can make it a bit smaller too. He calls. And again, this is a case where a player is playing out of flow, and he's missing out on me taking a stab at this pot. If you're going to make a raise anyway on this board, why not let the pre-flop aggressor make a bluff when he misses, which I would have done, and then he could raise me, and he would have got that bluff out of me. As it stands, he's letting me off easy and making a fold, letting me make an easy fold there because I didn't hit anything. Alright, let's watch this one because this was kind of fun. Folded to Eradicator in the small blind, and as he did the last time we were in the small blind, he raises me. Last time when I had ace-4 offsuit, I just called and checked and folded the flop when he let out at it. And I didn't like the way I played that hand, so I decided this time when I had a weak ace, I was going to raise him. Which I do, and he flats me. And again, which he's been doing a lot lately, I think this is the 3rd time against me that he's done it, he's let out into me, and he's not giving me a chance to raise him. But in this instance, because I took the pre-flop betting lead, I can represent a very strong hand. Basically, when he makes this bet, it's fairly easy for me to put him on a jack. He's not doing it with pocket 4s or pocket 2s, because he would have certainly slow played those. So somewhere in his hand there's a jack. Is it king jack? Could be. Is it ace jack? I think he actually, given the dynamic and the history we've had, I think he 4-bets me pre-flop with ace jack. And certainly, you know, hands better than ace jack, like queens, kings, aces. So I can safely take ace jack out of his range. So he has something like king jack, queen jack, something like that. But I'm fairly certain he has a jack. And because I'm fairly certain I know what he has, and I showed pre-flop aggression, I can represent to a thinking player that I have a better hand than what he has. So I make a small re-raise. Not committing too many chips. If he decides that, you know, hey, my king jack is good enough, I'm gonna shove on this gnat in my side, then I haven't committed too many chips. But what I have done is shown a lot of strength by raising pre-flop and re-raising him post-flop when he leads out into me. So I think that I think he's gonna fold queen jack, king jack a lot in this situation, unless he gets stubborn, which is what he does. So now I've picked up a gut shot, and I think my overcard is good, but I have the betting lead now. So if I want to take another stab on the flop, on the turn, excuse me, I can do that. When he checks to me, that's what my decision is. If I took a stab here, I would have to bet something like 18, 1900, and I probably should have. The reason I didn't was that's a large part of my stack. If I bet 1800 here, even though it's a small bet relative to the pot, it's still, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of my stack. So here I just decided to take the free card and hopefully hit my gut shot. Bink. Now what do we do? So if we are correct and he only has a jack, we shove, right? He's putting in 1800, which is about, you know, 35% of what he had left. If we shove, he's probably calling, and given how much he's already committed to this pot, and it seems fairly unlikely that we have an ace in this situation because because what ace would we have made that play on the flop with, other than a pure bluff, which happens to be the case in this spot. So it's very unlikely that we have an ace in this situation, and so raising might have gotten a lot of we might have got the rest of the stack. As it stands, I think I took the conservative route, guarded against him having some kind of weird backdoor flush draw. I'm not putting it on my 6 because there's not a lot of 6s in his range when he flats my 3-bet pre and then flats my raise on the flop. So I just call with my wheel, and he did in fact have a jack. I think he played it fine except for the river bet. I think I would have liked to see him check call the river and give me another chance to bluff him. If I was bluffing on the flop and then I checked the turn, I may take another stab at bluffing the river, and then he can just, happily call with his top pair. If he bluffs the river, I'm only going to call him with hands that beat him. He's not giving me a chance to fold hands that are less than his. So as it stands, I got pretty lucky there to win a nice big pot from a tough player, monkeying around a little bit on the flop. And pre-flop too, for that matter. Okay, I think I could justify a 3-bet here versus Cliff, but I also think a call might be fairly decent. Okay, I don't think this falls into the category of the weak lead that we've identified. His weak lead would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 300. He actually makes it a full, well, almost half pot, so we can safely fold there. That wasn't a good spot to try out our raise with air versus his weak lead move. Okay, if this is the hand I think it is, it's a big mistake coming up soon. So we mid-raise with the pocket 5s. Stu, who's the big stack at the table now, and the only player who has us covered, calls. Master calls and Coppercliff calls. Now this is the dream board when you have a small pocket pair. Little pro tip: if you have a small pocket pair and you get 3 callers, flop your set, and have an ace out there, you're going to win a lot of chips that way. So a lot of people in this spot will make the mistake of checking, try to slow play their monster hand. If this was 5-9-6 or 5-9-2 or 5-9 jack, something like that, I could almost agree with that play, because that's a hard flop to hit their pre-flop calling ranges. But because the ace is out there, and because there's 3 people there who call pre-flop, you want to get a lot of value. You want to get as much value as you can from people who flat called you with an ace. So I like leading here, which I do. Oh, it's actually not the hand I was thinking of. That's okay. I think I gave you a spoiler for a hand I play later on versus Stu. But we can still figure out the best play here. So, Pawnmaster calls. We can safely put him on some kind of weakish ace. I think he would have re-raised pre with ace queen, ace king. He's probably got something like ace jack, ace 10. Hopefully he has ace 9. That would be an ideal situation. Hopefully he has ace 9 or ace queen. He checks. We're going to bet again. He calls. And he checks the river. I think actually there is a mistake in this hand if I remember correctly. There's 38-70 in the pot. When your opponent has substantially less than that, which is what Pawnmaster does here, he has about 65% of the pot. And he called our flop and our turn bet. Go ahead and shove. Get the rest of his chips in. If he has something like 4,800, then make a small bet, but he has less than the size of the pot. He obviously is going to call, so why not get the rest of his money in? I try to get a little too cute, and I only bet, 25% of the pot, which is way too small. He calls, and I think he would have definitely called off the rest of his chips with ace jack. We left him with 1,300 chips when those could have been up here in the stack. So that was a mistake. So there was a mistake on that hand that was worth talking about. Alright, so we limped from the small blind versus spy network. It's kind of the same dynamic as when we limped versus FT caller. They're similar type players who defend their big blinds rather widely. So I'm going to limp in and hope that they don't raise and that we can play a small pot and I can take a lot of stabs. I bet out half the pot with bottom pair and he just calls. I think he's the type of player who's gonna call me with a lot of different hands. I think he's gonna call me with any 7, any straight draw, and because of that, I think I can safely take another stab at the pot, and I do, and he folds to the second barrel. Sometimes, if you've identified your opponent correctly, you almost have to take that second barrel. I've played a lot of hands with Spy Network where he will, call on the flop with pretty much anything he has and then float to later streets and then fold on later streets. So I use that dynamic here and fire the second barrel and got him to fold on the turn.
And Eradicator raises under the gun. We'll dump our suited weak ace. Yeah, this looks like a bad bet, but because he's not actually betting 6,400 into 1,200, he's betting 1,337 into 1,200, because that's all Eradicator has left, so he's betting the effective stack, not his whole stack, and he gets a call. It's a fun little run out. Yeah, I think everyone played their hand just fine there. Alright, we're going to isolate Copper Cliff after he limps. Generally when I isolate, I like to, when there's a limper and I'm going to raise, I take my usual open size, which is 2x, so that would be 400 in this case, and then add the total number of limpers. So in this case, 2x is equal to 400 plus 200, but for the limpers, so I make it 600. Try not to deviate too much from that unless have a reason to do so based on the player, based on the situation, etc., etc. If there's a player who's been limping a lot and you know he's going to call any raise size and you have, a top 5% hand, why not make it, 800 or 900 in this situation and try to get more value out of him pre-flop. But as it stands, we only have ace high here, so we're just going to isolate the limper, play a pot in position against another big stack, and hopefully get a c-bet through or hit a nice flop and win a big pot. As expected, Copper Cliff calls. Take a standard continuation bet, and he has nothing, so he folds. Would have bet any if he checked to us, I would have bet any flop that came up. The fact that we had top pair, top picker, is kind of irrelevant. It's nice as a backup plan, but we still would have bet the same exact size into any flop once he checked to us after we raised him pre-flop. Should open here for 400. Okay, so we opened for 400. We knew the Pun Master was in the big blind with only 7 big blinds, so I wouldn't have opened light in this spot. I wouldn't have opened with a marginal hand. I'm only opening in this spot with a hand that I'm calling off if Pun Master decides to shove. So that's my decision. Let's analyze Pun Master's decision. He has 7 big blinds. When he shoves, oops. You'll see he's giving us almost exactly 2 to 1, which means that he has to have a hand that beats our calling hand better than 68% of the time. Because we only have to win the pot 32% of the time after we make this call. That's a pure pot odds call. It's not an implied odds call because there's nothing behind now. Pun Master's all in, all those chips in the middle. We can do a pure pot odds call, and Ace Jack offsuit is definitely winning more often than 32% of the time against what Pun Master is shoving with. If you want to play around with an equity calculator, I know I talked about equity calculators in one of my previous videos. This is the equity calculator that comes with Poker Tracker. So let's assume that so there's our Ace Jack. let's assume that Pun Master is shoving a very, very tight range, which he's not, but let's just assume that for now. Let's say this is what he's shoving with. That's a very tight range to shove 7 big blinds with. Even in that tight of a range, you can see that we're winning 28% of the time. That's very close to what we need to make this a profitable call. If he's shoving, say we add these in here, which we probably can assume, maybe something like that. Then you can see it quickly becomes a profitable call. 33.15% is greater than 32%. And he's definitely shoving a wider range than even this, as we can see, because he does show up with the old King 9 suited. That's a very bad call. That's a very bad shove, given his stack size. If there was, say there was a limp somewhere in this range and a limp here, then he shoves with King 9 suited, I like that play a lot better. But he has to know that when I raise and he only has 7 big blinds and he's going over the top of me, I'm pretty much calling with any 2 cards. And you should know that, like I said before, I see that he only has 7 big blinds. I know that if he goes all in, I'm going to have to call. So I'm not opening light here. I have a hand, and King 9 suited definitely does not do well against whatever hand I have in this position. So that was basically just, I give up. I only have 7 big blinds. I'm going to gamble and see if I can suck out on somebody. It's tough to find spots when you only have 7 big blinds, but it's certainly easier. It's certainly easier to find better spots than the one that Pun Master chose to get the rest of his chips in the middle. I guess I'm glad he did it, because I did wind up making my straight and busting a tough player, although a tough player who did not have many chips left.